Network for fair, safe, and secure elections. Jennifer Roberts has done a number of things over the course of her career. I one time called her the Swiss Army knife of conversation because you'd be talking to her, you're like, wait, you ran for Congress, you were mayor of Charlotte, you speak Spanish, you've done international aid work. She's done everything you can do in a lifetime. She was an NCAA athlete. She's going to talk about none of that today. What she's going to talk about today instead is elections in the state of North Carolina. So thank you for being here, Jennifer.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you for hosting. I always tell Chris he needs to tell my kids that introduction. They're both in their 20s, and you know how parents are. But thank you, Chris. Thank you, Western Carolina. I hope you will notice that I wore purple because also it's nonpartisan, but it's also the color of the university. We are really pleased to be here. We may come back when the students are not so occupied. May come back in the fall because our Trust Elections Tour is going to visit at least 26 different cities and counties in our state. In 2022, we visited 14, one in each congressional district, and we did a virtual one, which had a couple hundred viewers as well, and where people were able to ask questions. And what we found in our work on the North Carolina Network for Fair, Safe, and Secure Elections, when people get accurate information from people they trust, the experts who are doing the work, it actually does move the needle, it does increase their confidence, it increases their civic participation, and it supports democracy. And that's what the Carter Center work is all about. Bob and I have been doing this since 2021, and we feel like North Carolina has a great election system. We want to keep it that way. We want people to understand some of the changes that have happened and to continue to trust their election workers and not harass or bother them. And so we have some great professionals here tonight, but I want to first introduce my co-lead for the North Carolina Network for Fair, Safe, and Secure Elections. We are bipartisan, nonpartisan, cross-partisan by design. We want to model what we want our community to do. And so when I got hired as the left-leaning co-lead, I said I got to find someone who leans right. Bob Orr, former justice in the North Carolina Supreme Court, is the one who leans right in a good way. But we have worked together on not just the Trust Elections Tour, but also an election commission, and Dr. Cooper is part of that work as well. It's all about supporting our democracy. So Bob has a great brief history of our elections in North Carolina, so please welcome Bob Orr.
Yeah, no, I won't talk about being short. Thank you all for being here. It's always great to be west of the Balsams, and happy to be in Catamount country. This is an introduction that I've done at our other election tours, and so it was in December of 1776, about 365 miles east of here, that the framers of the North Carolina Constitution met in Halifax to establish for the first time a representative democracy for the people of this state. A foundational principle of their efforts, as set out in the Declaration of Rights, was a system of elections. Over the course of these last 248 years, that foundational concept of elections by the people has undergone enormous changes that have strengthened and expanded the voting franchise, provided greater security for the electoral process, and expanded the scope of public officials that we elect. The democratic principle of election by the people is the fundamental foundation upon which our government and our democracy are built. Today we have nearly 7.5 million registered voters across the 100 counties of this state. We have professional staffers hired at the state level and local professional staffers hired by each local county board of elections to administer these elections. In an election year, some 25,000 other individuals of all political persuasions, our friends, our neighbors, work the polls over the course of the election period. The professional staff handles candidate filings and the preparation of ballots, while these non-staff individuals assist with pre-election day activities like early voting, absentee ballot requests and submissions, in addition to election day voting and the tabulation of votes, all of which leads to the certification of the election results. These Herculean tasks are accomplished within a framework of laws enacted over the years by the North Carolina legislature and regulations consistent with those laws as enacted by the State Board of Elections. A comprehensive set of security measures are in place to protect the right to vote and the accurate tabulation of those votes to determine election winners. And specific legal procedures are in place to allow challenges and complaints if any citizen feels that a violation of the law has taken place. Many people may take voting for granted, but as former President Dwight D. Eisenhower said, the future of this republic is in the hands of the American voter. Our election officials, from Cullowhee to Carrboro, from Morganton to Moxville, from Raleigh to Roanoke, all work relentlessly to make sure that our elections, so vital to American democracy, proceed fairly, safely, and securely. And tonight we're going to hear how they work to make that happen. And I'm pleased to welcome and introduce Rachel, but where's Lilly? Come on. Lilly Knoepp is the senior regional reporter for Blue Ridge Public Radio. She served as BPR's first full-time reporter covering Western North Carolina since 2018. She's a native of Franklin, North Carolina, not Franklin County, right? Franklin, North Carolina, who returns to Western North Carolina after serving as the assistant editor of Women at Forbes and digital producer of the Forbes Podcast Network. She holds a master's degree in international journalism from the City University of New York and earned a double major from UNC Chapel Hill in religious studies and political science. Welcome, Lilly, and thank you, and go Tar Heels.
Thank you. Sorry I didn't have to read my whole bio, but I am the moderator for this evening. I'm as Judge Orr said, I'm the senior regional reporter for Blue Ridge Public Radio. That means I cover everything west of Asheville. So it's great to have y'all west of Asheville here as well. Dr. Chris Cooper asked me to be here today, and he's the one, whenever anybody has a question about politics or the election, you want to text him in the middle of the night, he will always answer you and explain how elections work. So if he wants this event to go on, then we'll do it. So thank you so much. We are going to talk this evening about cybersecurity, election law, and election administration. So we're going to kick it off with cybersecurity. It's a very exciting topic. I mean, usually when the team talks about this, they have Torry Crass, who is appointed as the State Chief Risk Officer for the North Carolina Department of Information Technology, and focuses on cyber maturity and adopting a comprehensive approach to cybersecurity in collaboration with various government levels. And he brings over 25 years of IT experience with a significant focus on cybersecurity within global enterprises. And he's previously served as the Chief Information Security Officer for the North Carolina State Board of Elections, where he developed and managed the security roadmap and served as a security liaison between the board and its security partners. So Mr. Crass was unfortunately unable to be here today, so we're going to watch a short video about cybersecurity, and then we're going to invite our panelists up, and we are going to talk a little bit about cybersecurity. I believe Rachel is going to make that video happen.
Great. Well, welcome, Torry Crass. We have today the State Chief Risk Officer, who is going to talk to us about cybersecurity and North Carolina elections. Torry Crass joined the North Carolina Department of Information Technology in May of 2023, and he is currently focusing on increasing the cyber maturity of the state and strengthening the whole of state approach to cybersecurity with local, state, and federal partners. He has 25 years experience in IT, but he previously served as a Chief Information Security Officer for the North Carolina State Board of Elections for almost 4 years, and has only recently changed jobs But he is thoroughly aware of everything going on with our Board of Elections. He oversaw the implementation of the Board of Elections Security Roadmap, provided operations guidance for security with a goal of reducing risk, and he also served as a security liaison between the board and its partners, including the North Carolina National Guard, North Carolina Department of Public Safety, and the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Oh, and also the U.S. Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. So, oh, one more thing, he is a second lieutenant in the South Carolina State Guard. So, with that, Torry, I want to ask you to give us a quick overview of how the software for our State Board of Elections works, how it's secured, and how the actual machines, the tabulators, the electronic voting stuff, how all that is overseen and made that it's secure so nobody can hack it.
Thank you for the wonderful intro, Jennifer. Really appreciate it. And yes, all that information from Board of Elections time still generally applies. We still assist with Board of Elections from a cybersecurity perspective, and on election day support that group even in my current role. So it's great to still be able to be involved and help in that. So I think to just get right into it, so if you think about the voting apparatus and you show up to cast your vote on election day, you have a ballot marking device, and you have a bunch of other bunch of people around supporting this. There are tabulators and there's other components that go into this entire process. So there are a number of different technologies in use in the elections process. I think the first and foremost thing is they're not connected. They're not networked to the internet. They do not transmit votes or things of that sort over the internet. So that's one really important. So there's a lot of different things that go into the elections apparatus and the voting process at those levels. The connectivity and not having connectivity is a really important aspect of that, because we don't want to even take the risk of having those things connected and having a potential of having any challenges in that space. So even though that's been something that's called out in years past, the devices that are used don't have the capability to do the connection. The ballot marking devices, the things you go in and vote with, they don't actually have the cards needed, the equipment needed to do the connectivity. So that's been a very important aspect of making sure the devices themselves are secure. I think another component to this that helps is that there's an audit process around this entire apparatus. That includes before the ballot marking devices even go out to polling locations. They're fully tested, fully checked, fully audited beforehand. They get used on election day, and then they get checked again before they're put back into storage. So even in the event that there was some type of weird anomalous thing that pops up over the course of this, that should come out in that testing process as they're being evaluated, either beforehand, at which point they simply wouldn't be used in the election, or afterwards, and then that could be investigated. It could be, if there are problems there, that could be identified. So I think around the equipment, those are some really important things to keep in mind that are there to help with security and help promote confidence that when you cast your vote, there is security around that. There is security to understand that when you cast it, it's going into to be tabulated. There shouldn't be any problems with those devices. One other thing that I think is also important when we start talking about flash drives or removable media or things of that sort with respect to the elections equipment. Those are certified USB drives. They're specially purchased. They're unfortunately extremely expensive, the way that flash drives go. So if you think about, you go to a store and pick up a flash drive off the shelf, for instance, it might cost you, $5 or $10. The ones that are used, that are certified and used, are over 100 typically. They're upwards of like $150 just as an example. So they're very expensive because they've gone through testing, they've been certified to be no good. And with important things such as elections, those flash drives only get a single use, because we don't even want to take the risk that there's a chance that things get overwritten, that there's data there that shouldn't be there. So I think that's another aspect of controls around the technical part of the voting equipment. And then just speaking really quickly on process in general. So I talked about the people around the equipment at the polling stations on election day, and I think that's just as important as the rest of these technical pieces. Is you have friends and neighbors and people who have signed up to help with the elections apparatus to be involved in that. And part of their job is to watch for things that might take place that shouldn't be taking place. They're gonna keep an eye on things, make sure there aren't people standing around where they shouldn't be, going by voting equipment or systems they shouldn't be by. They're gonna watch for instances of people potentially tampering with things that they shouldn't be tampering with. So I think all of those things really come into play to help instill confidence, as long as folks realize all these different things are taking place and all these different controls and security mechanisms exist. So,
Great. That interview is about 17 minutes. We thought maybe that would be a little bit much to sit and watch. I hope you all learned a little bit about cybersecurity. We're going to talk a little bit more about that from the local perspective as we invite our panelists up, and we can talk about the cybersecurity aspects of that. Yeah, everybody can come on up. Our panelists are Adam Brines. He's served as the elections director in Swain County since May of 2023. He graduated from Emory University in Georgia with a degree in political science and started his role recently after that. We also have Scott Ponasakit, who was the principal election administrator in 6 counties in California, Washington, Utah, and Virginia. He also consults on election issues with advocacy groups, nonprofits, election offices, and works with the Carter Center. He is also a former U.S. Army intelligence officer and a military attaché. Ron Mao is our member of the Jackson County Board of Elections. He's also previously a county commissioner here in Jackson County and lives here. So thank you for everyone from Jackson County who came out. Donnie Davis is sitting next to him. Donnie is a lifelong resident of Haywood County who has had a career in law and public service, graduated right here from Western Carolina University in 1975 with a degree in political science. And he was appointed as the district court judge in 1984. So thank you all. Oh, we've got more people as well. And Larry Leake is also joining us for the election law portion. He is a veteran attorney who has practiced law for over 40 years throughout Western North Carolina and recently retired as the North Carolina District Court Judge from the 24th Judicial District. And Kelly Turnow is currently the Associate General Counsel and Chief Compliance Officer for Western Carolina University, where she focuses on all aspects of higher education and oversees the university's Title IX program. She previously worked as the Associate General Counsel for the State Board of Elections. So a big thank you to all of our panelists for coming out today. Scott drove here all the way from Virginia, so I think he wins that prize for commitment of the outside of our moderators. But I wanted to just get to know all of you first, and then we'll dig back into cybersecurity. You know, as a journalist, I'm really interested in just how you all got into this, why you're working with the Board of Elections. You know, Adam, this is your job out of college. This is what you wanted to do. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So, does this work? There we go. So at Emory, as you said, I graduated in May of last year. So I've been out of college for less than a year. At Emory, I had worked with the Emory Votes Initiative, which was a group that tried to promote civic engagement and voting on campus, especially among students. We had a lot of students from out of state, including myself, or from different counties, and they didn't really know where to register to vote, how to register to vote, and a lot of times they'd sort of throw up their hands. So we tried to sort of be that intermediary. So that was what drew me to the voting side of things and working in a nonpartisan way to make sure people vote.
Great. Mr.
Same question?
Yeah, that'd be great.
Well, it was a long time ago when I left the Army and started the political consulting business, and I ran a number of successful political campaigns. And during that process, I had many interactions with the county clerk, who is the chief election officer of the county I was in. And I had some negative interactions with her and her staff over a number of things. And I remember wagging my finger saying, I'm going to fix this place. So I started out as an election reformer. So within 18 months of making that vow, or wagging my finger, I was the director. And that was in 1994. And since then, I've administered elections in a number of different places. And the pattern of my career is to go into larger jurisdictions where there have been some issues or turnover in the top leadership, and to reframe things and right the ship, so to speak. But what's a guy who's not from North Carolina doing on this panel? Well, you have to ask Bob that question. But what I hope to contribute to the conversation is a perspective over time and over different places and different voting paradigms and different sets of election laws and perspective and changes in technology to maybe validate, amplify, and contrast and compare what is done here in North Carolina. So hopefully I can add some of that perspective to our conversation.
Is that working?
Yeah.
Okay. So as Lilly stated, yeah, I've been an elected official in Jackson County. I ran for NC 119, ran for chair, lost those 2 elections. So I've been involved in the process. And my wife finally had enough and said no more. And so this was a way for me to still be involved. And I just was I'm a numbers guy. This is a lot of data and numbers to look at, process orientated. It was appealed to me and things I like to do. So I expressed my interest and was fortunate enough to get selected to serve on the Jackson County Board of Elections. And the other, another thing too, so just like that, people be excited about voting and get people, haven't been on the elected side. It's about turnout, getting people registered. I don't understand why people don't get out and register to vote. And I went and looked at my voting record today. We moved here August 1st of 2005. I registered on August 11th of 2005. And that's been my track record all the time. One of my sons has lived up to that kind of pattern too, where he, gets absentee ballots for Village of Forest Hills elections when he was at NC State. So just think it's an important part of the whole process.
I'm still trying to figure out how I got here. No, I was district court, as Larry knows, is a elected position. I ran 6 times as a district court judge. I was fortunate enough to have opposition only once, and thank goodness there wasn't much of that. But anyway, so and I was the first 18-year-old in Haywood County that was to register when they finally opened it to 18-year-olds. Bob, you remember Zeb Alley, so he made sure I was one of the first. I was actually the first one to register. So, and they told me, they said, look, you won't do a whole lot. The director does most of it, and that's true. And then they said you won't have that much to do. And then came along this thing called COVID in 2020, and so I've always realized how important workers are in elections and how important the Board of Elections is. But I got to tell you, 2020 was a taxing event for a lot of folks. So anyway, I'm still here because we got 2024 coming up. So that's how I got here.
Well, I'm a native of a county known as Madison, and to Western North Carolinians who've been involved in the political process, that is a county which has a great love for politics, has had a lot of battles. I spent a term in the state senate in the late 70s, early 80s. I spent some time trying to advocate for candidates that Justice Ford was advocating against, and he is a very formidable opponent. But is reflective, I hope he and I are reflective of the fact of what politics used to be. We might disagree on things, we might be angry at each other on occasion, but we've always been friends and recognized that each of us were essentially good folk trying to better our communities. Served one term in the state senate, but I'm probably here tonight as an institutionalist for the North Carolina State Board of Elections. A very unique board, only one of a kind in this great country. It is totally an independent agency. It is not housed in any other branch of government. It's a quasi-judicial court on occasion. I spent a total of 20 years on that board. 16 as chairman, was appointed by 3 governors. And it was that board which started the computerization process for records, bringing computers into vote, if you will. We have a great state board of elections, a great election system, one that we should be proud of, have confidence in, and protect.
I think so.
I can't believe I have to follow that. I got started in elections right after law school. I started working at the North Carolina General Assembly, and I was fortunate enough to be a nonpartisan staff attorney there. I got to staff legislative committees and be committee counsel and draft legislation, and I focused on elections and redistricting in addition to state and local government issues, and that was just a wonderful experience. And then I became a lobbyist for a short while and decided that was not for me. I really missed doing that, that in the weeds kind of nonpartisan legal work, especially with respect to elections. And when an attorney position job opened up at the State Board of Elections, I was ecstatic and jumped at that opportunity. And so that's how I got started, and absolutely loved my job at the State Board of Elections. It's probably been my, don't tell WCU, but it's absolutely like my favorite job in terms of what I got to do every single day, because mainly working with county election directors was my favorite part. But I got to work on a lot of really cool election administration issues, including voter ID implementation, and one that I'm most proud of, which was implementing the online voter registration system in conjunction with the DMV. And so that was very exciting. And also trying to administer an election in a pandemic with an 8-week-old baby. So it was a great challenge and loved every single minute of it.
Wow. Thank you so much. See, that's so much better than your bios. Well, I do want to talk about cybersecurity a little bit. Mr. Leake, you did mention a little bit about the digitization process of kind of moving into the digital age of voting. I don't know, I would love to hear a little bit more about that conversation. I'm sure that security was a big part of that discussion.
Well, it is true that it was a step taken very cautiously, with great fear upon the part of election officials. At that time, the executive director of the State Board of Elections was Gary Bartlett, who was a great proponent of shifting into the 21st century. We had certain issues, certain problems as we navigated towards the computerization of all election records, the ability to communicate directly between the State Board and county offices. One of my more memorable moments as we struggled through that was a call from a Republican legislator who I assured everything was on course, all was good. The next morning, after I had assured the Republican legislator that all was well, he had no reason to worry, that we Democrats had nothing up our sleeve that was going to ensure the election of Democrats, I get a phone call from Gary Bartlett, sitting in my law office. It says, "Mr. Chairman," I could tell some hesitancy in his voice because he had been a greater proponent of this than had I. He says, "I hate to tell you this, but we have a major, major problem." And I said, "Well, great, Gary. This is what you're going to do. You're going to get out of that chair. You're going to walk over to the legislative building, and you're going to go into this representative's office and assure him I did not intentionally lie him, and that we're going to make it right." And we did. The system has continuously advanced, and you may want to do this at some point. I'm a talker. The system has made great strides. And one thing I would like to say to everybody on the ear of security, we had great debates. You know, we were transitioning from the majority of our counties using paper ballots and still using ballot boxes in many, hand counting. I was told by one of the major suppliers of computers, "Look, if you're looking for perfection, we cannot promise that. We can tell you for a fact," and this would have been about 2004, 2006, that if you do recounts, you're going to find 3 or 4 ballots that were miscounted. Now they're quick to say, "Whoa, it's not the machine's fault. It was long pencil was used ink rather than pencil. Some human being caused that 3 or 4 vote mistake." So how has the State Board of Elections dealt with that over time? And let me stress that my term, my involvement ended in 2012 when Justice Orr did not campaign hard enough for the then elected governor to reappoint me. But I've kept up with what has happened. First of all, we developed a very elaborate audit system, both before and after. After every election, some machine is chosen at random. If it is close enough, we have added a system to the computer. We've added an actual paper ballot that can be counted if we have any concern. So we've merged 2 systems. paper ballot and the computer to allow us to move faster. And the State Board of Elections, which now has a staff of 68, is a group of committed folks. The current state board is a group of committed folks. And truly, if there's anything that goes wrong in our counting process, it's going to get caught, made aware of, and we have the ability, if it takes it, to hand count. So I think North Carolina can be very proud about the most important part, in my view, of the election process. Ensuring that whether we have voter ID or don't have voter ID, that there's a system to ensure that the votes that are cast are accurately counted.
Thank you. Mr. Barnes, I'm really interested in how you've heard questions about cybersecurity in Swain County. What kind of questions have you heard here locally from folks who are getting ready to vote that want to understand how the local board of elections make sure that their vote is counted correctly and that nothing can happen from a cybersecurity perspective?
Well, we haven't had major issues in that area, thankfully. People are generally fairly trusting of us. But one thing that I've heard from at least one or two people who've come in is they do seem to think that voting machines are connected to the internet. So the tabulator where you actually feed the ballot in, or in some counties where you're marking on what's called an express vote, a touchscreen device that'll print out a card. That's a concern I've heard from a couple people, that they think it's connected to the internet. And we do assure them that it's not. They are obviously tested before every election. We've also heard from people, we got new voting machines recently. We actually went from having the oldest system in the state to the newest. And some people seem to think that the new modern system meant that they would have to vote on a touchscreen, which made them doubtful of how, I guess, secure the process was. But once they were assured it would be a hand-marked paper ballot, those concerns went down a little bit. So I would expect maybe in counties like Jackson, where you use a touchscreen to cast every ballot, they might have a few more problems with people coming in trying to cast aspersions. But we haven't had too many issues.
That's good. Mr. Konopasek, would you be able to speak to, kind of from an election administration perspective, how you talk to folks about the way that their ballot is, counted and taken on to the State Board of Elections?
Sure. But I would make the point that when we talk about election technology and cyber threats, we tend to focus almost uniquely on the machines that count the ballots. But there's a myriad of other technologies that are part of the process that are subject to cyber threats as well. When I started in the business, we had paper files and no email. We had paper memos. During my career, we saw email and laptop or desktop computers and digitized images and barcodes and barcode scanners and electronic poll books and election night internet results reporting instead of the fax machine. All of these things, all of these technologies that we kind of take for granted are part of that election technology ecosystem. And some of them are more vulnerable than others to mischief or errors or tampering. And really the most secure piece of the whole election technology puzzle is the voting machines themselves. They're locked up in a vault, they're access control, serial number, tested, retested, chain of custody when it's moved from one place to another. But there's this whole other realm of technology that wraps around elections where things can happen. But things haven't happened because our cybersecurity folks, or IT folks, have taken a larger view of election technology and helped us tighten down security on all of our processes, and not just the voting machines themselves. So I always used to tell people that you shouldn't worry about the security of a voting machine, because I have a lock behind a locked door in an alarmed building with cameras. If you're going to tamper with it, you have to tamper with 1,500 of them, and that's going to take a while, and you have to do it without me catching you. So voters should feel very confident about the integrity and security of the voting machines themselves. But it's fair to be concerned about state voter registration system and how that works, and what are the protocols in place for those types of things. Electronic poll books, what measures are you taking to make sure that they also have been tested and work well? So that would be my contribution to the conversation, is to point out that there's this whole ecosystem of technology that wraps around elections. It's not just voting machines.
Yeah, I think that's all of our questions for cybersecurity. Are there any audience questions, unless anyone else has anything to add?
I want to ask the local board members what their role is in helping the election director and staff oversee the security system.
So Amanda, what do our director's actually sitting there, she's down. I told her I'd point her out and call her. No, so yes, the machines are locked up. You know, and I've only been on the Board of Elections since July, so I've only been through a primary. So I'm most familiar with our process for counting our mail-in ballots, and so we have one machine. You know, we have to meet 5 times a week before the election. Go ahead and count the ones that have been mailed in, and the machine's been locked up. It comes in, it has little locks with codes on it. The numbers get verified, they get cut off so we can scan them. I mean, there's a very detailed process to make sure it is followed and there's not going to be any security issues at all. And I should back up, even the mail-in ballots, we first verify those. Was there a photo ID included? Do they have 2 signatures? If there's a notary that signed it, then it's only 1. And each one of us is all 5 of us initial those, approve them, and then they're counted, and that's when the other security measures come in. So very secure. I have absolutely no problems with the process.
We do have some other questions back here. Unless Mr. Davis wanted to add to that. Oh, sorry. Do you want to add to that? Sorry.
Well, one thing that I found when I got to the Board of Elections is the chairperson is in charge of security for the voting machines by statute. They didn't tell me that when they asked me to do this. I found that out, and so one of the first things I did was make sure those voting machines are secure. So in Haywood County, they are, and we actually have a security system where they're located, and we don't even tell folks where they're located. So, because I told our board, I said, I'm the one that's responsible for that, so you doggone right, we're gonna have security. And so we have that. You know, the thing that also about supporting your director, we're so fortunate in Haywood County, we have a staff of 4, and for a county that's, they say has 65,000 people. If there's not 80,000 people in Haywood County, you know, I mean, at least in the last 3 years. So they're understaffed, they're overworked, and they're underpaid. And one of the things I've been trying to do is get them more help. Here's what people don't realize too about the Board of Elections, the County Board of Elections. We have a good working relationship with their county, our county. Our county commissioners are good, our county manager is good to work with. But the problem is, they want to always think that we're part of the county, that our employees are their employees. They're not. They're the Board of Elections employees. And so they have to go through all this stuff about pay raises and be in the personnel department and human relations. And so, in trying to support what they do, other than just like Ron said, that, you know, we do the sample audits after the election to make sure the flash drive, the tape, and the hand counted ballots all match up. So there's 3 ways they check those: flash drive, there's a tape, rolling tape, and there's the paper ballots. And when we do that sample audit, all those have to match up. And it's like Larry said, you might have one ballot that was kicked out or something, but for the most part, I've been there since 2018, they always match up. And the one time we tried to do a hand count check, it took them 3 times. They made 3 mistakes before they finally got it correct. We put it in the machine, it took it 20 seconds to count them and get it correct. So if you want to know how technology works, that's how. But going back to the board, one thing that would really help, and I guess it would require a legislative mandate, is the county funds us. So we have to go to them and ask for money, and all of you know how hard that is. So it would be helpful if we had some state funding and made sure the county understood that we're not an agent, or agency of theirs. We're independent, but we have to depend on them on funds. So that's one of the biggest areas I've found that I've had to try to work with our board about. But we have and you know, one other thing while I'm talking, I'm like Larry, I always say too much. My wife says, just say what you want to say and hush. But we had, after the 2020, you all know what happened. We had people come in and want to open our machine up and see if there's a modem in it, and questioned a bunch of things. And my first question was, well, which election in this county are you saying is inaccurate? Well, they never could tell me. And so I would just say, we're not going down rabbit holes. I come from a profession of facts and evidence. Well, I don't deal with speculation. But I think over time, it's programs like this, and we're very transparent. We let people come, although we have a small place to meet, we let folks come in, and you know, when you're the chairperson, you're not supposed to recognize them if they didn't sign up to speak, but we're pretty flexible about that and let those folks ask questions, and we answer those questions, even during our meetings. And so I think the more transparent you can be, the more open you can be, the more people you can get involved, and the more trust you build. We've had folks that we finally got them to volunteer, and one thing I would say, and then I'll hush, but you know, here's what you got to understand. Everybody that's involved in the Board of Elections, they really have a passion for it. These volunteers, I mean, the hours they work on election day and early voting is unbelievable. And they come in, they're just good citizens of the county. They're your neighbors and your friends. And so what I would tell some of those folks sometimes, are you going to tell me that all these good people here that are volunteering their services come in here and they're going to try to, you know, do something about the elections? No, they're your neighbors working, and we have checks and balances. So I think that's the best way you can probably support your board, is try to get, you know, support build up in the county.
Thank you. We had a question.
I wanted to mention something about the Jackson County voting machines, because we have the express votes, and that is just a printer. And so as a election worker, we always tell the people, you know, we do this and do that, and once you print that, you look over it. Is it correct? Is this what you wanted to do? Because this is just a printer, and then you put it through the vote where it's actually counted. So that people actually can see, so it's not like the touch screen. I just thought that you were a little vague about that, and because people actually can see exactly what is on their ballots that they have voted.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, and we do have express votes in Swain County as well. They're just our backup system that we have to have for ADA compliance, but you're correct. So on the express vote, there's a barcode, and that's what the machine is going to read. But below the barcode is going to be a list in text of your selections for every office, so people can see what they're selecting.
That it's,
Yeah.
you know, that's not something.
I think we have one more question.
Yeah, just it's more of a general security question. So, so it's a say it's a local election, or so Jackson County only election, and Jackson County certifies it. Is that it, or does that still have to get reported to the state? And if it's a if it's a state election, then Jackson County has to report its results to the state. And I guess how does that get done? Is it that someone's driving with a jump drive, or how does that? What's the kind of security there to make sure that it gets transmitted from way out here in Western North Carolina to Raleigh or whatever? I don't know who can answer that.
I think a simple answer to that question, the communication system is in place, and that information arrives electronically, not the machines in Raleigh counting the vote, but the report of the vote arrives in Raleigh on election night. It's immediately looked at by the staff of the State Board of Elections to see if there's anything that seems peculiar about the results. There is a canvas day with the local board where folks come in, and if there are any questions that have been raised, the county board deals with that. If there's any major questions that have been raised, in all probability, someone from the North Carolina State Board of Elections has been dispatched to that county to help resolve what the puzzle is. Sometimes people writing down numbers, transposed numbers. So the communication is quick. It goes to the state board quick, where it gets compiled with other numbers that lead to the state results that you're talking about. If the county board, say Jackson, since we've got a Jackson supervisor sitting here to be picked upon, if for some reason someone still questions the results as canvassed and certified by the Jackson board, they may file a protest petition within 24 hours. The board would hear, local board would hear from everybody and anybody, and then there's the option of appealing to the State Board of Elections, which would have the authority to do many things: order recounts, overturn elections, order new elections.
And I guess my question is more just like, it's really more of a technical question. Is there a special system in place? Because we're talking about, they're not connected to the internet, but are the results, I'm not trying to conspiracy thing here. I'm just curious. Is there a special setup, or is it just a secure
Let's look at it.
and encryption type thing between Raleigh and Jackson County?
Let's look at it for just a moment.
Yeah.
The votes are announced in Jackson County. Everybody in Jackson County knows what Jackson County says the votes are. Those vote totals are transmitted to Raleigh, where they are almost immediately available off the State Board of Election website. Any candidate or political activist would quickly detect if there was any change in numbers from Jackson County to Raleigh. And if there was, they'd be looked at.
Okay.
It's all public from beginning to end.
The physical equipment is handled in the county. As Judge Leake said, once that information is reported and the physical evidence has been retrieved from the voting machines and verified by the county during canvass, right after they're physically verified, then those results are reported to the State Board of Elections electronically. But it does not involve any actual evidence, any of the hard evidence and equipment that is used in the county. But the State Board of Elections has a lot of oversight over even a one county election. They are going to be intimately involved. They are going to be, if not on the ground, very available, ready and waiting, and it is truly a statewide effort, even for a one county election.
think this question has actually been a great bridge to bring us to the election administration section of the evening. Could you speak to, whoever wants to start, since we're all just chatting now, kind of the role of the board of director versus the role of the board of elections, and how those are different and how they work together? Sure. Speak to your job.
So I think that a good way to think about it is, in a company you have a board of directors often, and then you have a chief operating officer. And it's not a perfect comparison, but that's a bit like what we have at the county board level. Day-to-day operations are going to be overseen by the director to ensure that the county is following all of the state standards and all the state guidelines. However, the Board of Elections is going to be responsible for taking actions like approving an early voting plan. That has to be done by the Board of Elections. Approving absentee ballots, that has to be done by the Board of Elections. So the director doesn't have free reign, but has to follow the law and the direction of the board. So it's more of a day-to-day thing versus board oversight in terms of that relationship.
Mr. Davis, would you want to add to that at all, from the chairman's perspective of the Board of Elections?
You mean involving the director?
Yeah, just how y'all work together.
Well, I always tell Robert Inman's our director. He's a great director. I have to evaluate him every year, this personnel thing. So he didn't have the right water for me one day, and I said, I need your evaluation back. What Adam said is right. The board, like we had to decide which voting machines we were going to purchase. But we always listen to our director, who gives us his assessment of things, and so we have a good, close working relationship with him. And all the audits that he has, like the sample audit. I think you were asking about how this is transferred on election night. We have a sample audit on Thursday, and I don't know if we talked much about that. I think we touched on that a little bit. But on Thursday, we don't know which precincts they're going to tell us to audit. The state board sends us an email that morning, probably around 10 o'clock, and they tell us which precinct we're going to audit, so we don't know. So we go and get that, and that's when all those things have to match up. And so, to answer your question, and like Larry said, if anything's happened, it's going to get caught somewhere along the line. But the director is, if you don't have a good director, you got problems. We're lucky in Haywood County to have Robert Inman because he's been there so long. But mainly you just try to like I said, I keep going back to what I said. They're overworked, underpaid, understaffed, and trying to get folks to understand that is really hard. And I know the General Assembly back in 2020, we had some grant money that the General Assembly's cut out now. I don't know what we would have done without the grant money for all the COVID gear that we got. I think Arnold Schwarzenegger maybe had money available. We could not have functioned unless we had gone to the county commissioners and had them spend a lot of money on just protective equipment. We had to have shields at the voting places. We had Robbie came up with some kind of marker on the Express Vote touchscreen. We don't have those on election day, by the way. We have 30 of them. We use them in early voting. But he came up with so that they wouldn't have to touch the screen. And you threw it away. And so you just think of, he thinks of all kinds of things that I wouldn't think of. But I think the board, in respect to your relationship with and the other staff, is you just try to support them in that way, and you have to trust them, and they have to trust you. We like I said, we have a great staff, and they do a great job, and so that's about all I can
You know, one of the biggest things that has changed as far as election administration goes here in North Carolina in the recent elections has been the implementation of voter ID. I'm really interested to hear from y'all how that implementation has gone in the most recent elections. It sounds like, Ms. Turnout, you were involved in kind of putting the whole thing. Would you be able to speak to kind of some of the background of it?
Sure. So, you know, it's been implemented and de-implemented and re-implemented quite a few times, and all with a little bit different requirements. You know, and in 2019, you know, implemented almost the full way, and then kind of at the last minute pulled back. And so I think with those, really the most important thing is to come up with processes that work at the county level for, and you really don't even realize how many steps go into creating a process that is as voter friendly as can be, right, and as easy to understand. And so, you know, what are they going to do when they arrive at check-in? What happens first? What if they don't look like the picture? What if their name is different? What if they didn't bring their ID that day? What if they don't have an ID? All of these questions have to be addressed, and then you somehow have to convey that to the public, and it's a huge challenge. You know, several times that voter ID has been implemented either by the General Assembly or then the courts later has been, you know, you have to have funding to provide the outreach and the education that voters need. And if no funding comes with that, again, as you heard, so the county boards of elections are funded by the county commissioners, which is odd, right? Because they're a creation of this state legislature. We have a state board of elections, but the state board of elections does not control the county board of elections funds. And so you have all these kind of funding implications, and it's really, it's a challenge. There's no easy way to kind of do it. The best you can do is try to involve the public and the counties in implementing rules that make sense for the state, right? Because we all need to operate under the same rules, even though they are administered locally by the counties, and it's a challenge. There's no good, I think, no easy way to do it. Yeah.
Does anyone locally have anything to share about how voter ID has been implemented in the last elections? Have you all gotten a lot of questions? I know in our reporting with Blue Ridge Public Radio, we kind of asked on primary day for if folks had any issues, and pretty overwhelmingly across the region, we didn't get a lot of questions. So that's just my experience. Does anyone else have any experiences in the most recent election day?
Yeah, I don't know of any issues. I think a lot of this just goes back to letting people know what the process was. I take a step back. I remember when it all happened, and there's an exception form. There are things you don't have to have your ID with you. And the one I always remember is if your house was hit by a natural disaster with the next number of days in election. I think that's one of the exceptions. But when all this happened, I remember, you know, again on social media, you see some crazy stuff sometimes, and seeing some people saying, "Oh my gosh, I thought we were going to have voter ID, and look at this form that this county developed, and here are the exceptions." And I was like, "This is nuts." I went and looked at the actual piece of legislation, and the form, you know, everything there's listed. The form has everything there listed. The form's actually from the State Board of Election. It's totally the way the process is supposed to work, but yet people did not understand that at all. And that's just my one anecdote about that.
Yeah, I think it was an interesting process. Did you want to add something? Sure.
Sort of going off what Ron said, one of the challenges for us a little bit has been messaging, because we want to emphasize that everyone is going to be asked to show a photo ID, but if you don't have a photo ID for whatever reason, or you don't have it with you, you should still go to the polls, because you can vote a provisional ballot. And one of the ways you can do that is with this exception form that he was referring to. And pretty much if you go to the polls, you vote a provisional ballot, you fill out the exception form truthfully with a legitimate reason, your vote is probably going to end up being counted by the Board of Elections. So we've kind of tried to emphasize that everyone will be asked to show an ID, and that's the way to guarantee your vote will count. But also people should come to the polls if they don't have one on.
Can I say one thing, Lily?
Sure.
I was not a big proponent of voter ID because I didn't know what you were gonna do if people couldn't have access to have them. So to me, it was all about access. I think they've done a good job of taking care of that. You can use your social security number if you don't have your ID. There are a lot of exceptions. So, but the jury's still out on that because we've only had that during a primary election. 2024 is going to be a totally different story. So I think it'll be okay. It's kind of like when we didn't get express vote for election day. Because we had 70-some% vote in Haywood County in 2020, 30-some thousand people out of 40-some thousand registered voters. We've got more registered voters now, and so I was scared to death about lines, people having to mark the ballot and stick it in the reader. That takes a long time, and so going back to the voter ID, I'm a little concerned if that's gonna, in 2024, when you have a lot of people voting, if that's gonna cause delays, because we all saw what happens when the results are delayed or there are long lines, people standing in line to vote. And so I still am concerned about that. So.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. You know, voter turnout is around 20% for the primary, to your point, and I go, we're hoping that turnout is higher than that for the 2024 presidential election. So.
And that's why you always want to roll out something like voter ID in a primary or a municipal election for that reason. You don't want to get to the statewide general and have to try to figure out how to implement something, especially like voter ID. And I'll just say, I worked as a poll worker during the primary, and I actually had way more people, go poll workers, sign up in your county, go talk to your election director. I actually had way more people who were much more confused about what a primary was than what the voter ID requirements were. And I spent a lot of time trying to help them understand what a primary means and why can I not have a Democrat ballot if I'm a registered Republican, or why am I only seeing Democrat nominees on my ballot? And so that was actually a lot, which I was not expecting. And so it was a really good experience too, to see, oh, this is actually, you know, what the people in this precinct were concerned about and were not understanding.
I think one of the other questions that we get a lot about kind of election integrity is around voter fraud. And here in Western North Carolina, you know, I have done some reporting on some allegations of voter fraud, whether it was with former Congressman Mark Meadows in Macon County, or with some vacation homeowners in Graham County. And can anyone, would you, Mr. Konopasek, would you be able to speak to kind of how often voter fraud occurs and how that process is dealt with at the state level?
Well, voter fraud is nearly non-existent. There's always people who will try to game any system, and it's the same with elections, but there are so many cross-checks and balances that those types of schemes almost never are successful. They're always caught out. And interestingly, my experience is any allegations of fraud have nothing to do with the actual counting of the ballots. It has to do with someone didn't speak English, so they shouldn't have been able to vote, or allegations of ineligible people voting, which is the most current one, and I think is kind of the theme of this upcoming year, is people not qualified, not eligible, being able to vote. But almost all those allegations come with no facts. They come with no names. So it's really difficult for directors and boards of elections to follow up on any of those things, or prosecutors or investigators, if there's no names given. But it really doesn't happen and when it, like I said, when it does happen, it tends to be around eligibility questions. And it's not directly involved with the counting of the ballots. The ballot harvesting is kind of a theme that is, you hear all around the country. But North Carolina gets the notoriety of being the only place that it was actually detected. So ballot harvesting is not really a thing and ballot drop boxes are secure, and there are so many checks and balances with an absentee ballot. Was it cast by the person to whom it was issued? Is the ballot inside the ballot that the voter was given? Does the name match? Does the signature meet all the requirements? So there's, like I said, there's all these checks and balances that really thwart any efforts at trying to defraud the system on a wholesale basis. Retail, there's always people who try, but the system has enough redundancies built into it that it almost never happens.
Would anyone else like to add to that? I think, a lot of these instances that I'm speaking about are just could you give some advice to folks about when they should be updating their addresses before voting? And what counties they should be voting in?
And we should say that's not gonna get you a criminal conviction or anything if you don't, if you forget where to register, or you didn't register close to your move and that kind of thing. So I hope it's really important to balance that notion of voter fraud with making sure that it doesn't hinder people's ability and willingness and openness to go and ask questions about where do I register? Do I need to register somewhere else? Am I in the right place? Those kinds of things. So we have to make sure that we take that very seriously and don't discourage people also.
So the flip side of voter fraud is actually voter disenfranchisement, that for some reason the voter who's otherwise eligible is not able to cast their ballot or cast the correct ballot. And those responsibility for that largely falls on the voter to make sure that they're registered and that they know where to vote, and make sure that their registration is current. So when they show up, that their name is on the list and they are eligible to vote. But there are more, my experience over the years in many different jurisdictions is there's a real problem that does happen is people who are eligible for whatever reason are not able to vote. And that happens with much more frequency than any alleged voter fraud, ineligible people voting. So it's always a balancing act with security in general, but also with elections, is, how do you keep things tight, but still have things permissive enough that you're not disenfranchising or penalizing people who might otherwise be eligible to vote. So it's always kind of a balancing act, but one problem does happen for a whole multitude of reasons, not necessarily the fault of the voter or of any political party, or and that's disenfranchisement. But voter fraud just doesn't really happen. It's not really a thing.
Lilly, can I jump in?
Sure.
and
I was
ask
going
a
to say, I
question?
think it's time for audience questions.
Yeah. Could you explain, and this is probably for the lawyers, if you do think there's a problem, what's the proper way to go about raising that issue or challenging a particular action by the board?
There are many different ways depending on what the issue is. So say, for example, you think that someone may not be registered in the proper place. There's a couple different ways to go about dealing with that issue. You can submit a voter challenge where you say, hey, I do not think that this person lives where they are registered to vote, and then the burden is, however, on you to show some evidence that that is the case. Interestingly, if you're challenging a candidate's residency, once you make that challenge, the burden is actually on the candidate to prove that they do live in the district, which is kind of interesting. But that's one way. There are, of course, the State Board of Elections has an investigations unit. You can call them. They're actually very accessible to the public. You can always call them, and many of them are former law enforcement officers who now specialize in election investigations. But you can always call with any kind of information that you think someone's doing something illegal. I can vouch from when I worked there that they will absolutely, if you give them enough information to follow up on an issue, they will absolutely follow up on issues. There are also, I know on the State Board's website, there's also just a general election complaint form. So if you're not sure where it fits, you can fill that out, and those are easily found on ncsbe.gov. So there are a lot of ways that one can try to let either the state board or their county board know of an issue. You can always also call. County boards are extremely accessible. They always have someone available during business hours to answer the phone, and so that's another way. I can promise you they do not want something happening that should not be happening, and so if you let them know and give them enough information to follow up, they will absolutely do that.
Do we have any other community?
I just had a follow-up question on the voter ID regulations. I know you had said there was a lot of work that got put into it, and then it kept getting pulled back and going back, and there's obviously a lot of requirements and things. Is the way they have that set up now, do we anticipate that those are the rules that will stick? Do you think that they'll change? Because I know I do a lot of voter registration here on campus, and when we were waiting to find that out, it was like, we don't know if your Western ID is gonna work, or, so do we anticipate those things will change coming up into the general election, or do we think that this is pretty much the way it's gonna go, the way we just went through the primary?
So I can't ever say for sure what the courts will do. There are still some pending cases, and Chris might know better than me. I don't know if there are any hearings scheduled between now and the general. They generally don't do that because you don't want to change election rules very close to an election. I can assure you that the Western Carolina University ID is absolutely still valid to use, and the same types of IDs are still valid to use in the general election, and so that will absolutely remain the same.
Sorry, another question. So, does North Carolina participate in the Electronic Registration Information Center, Eric? And I don't think they do. We used to. Yeah. So I'd like to hear your comments on that.
Yes. So we used to for a short period. I think it was 2019, 2020-ish, and then the General Assembly legislated that we were no longer able to participate. And so there are still some states that participate, but North Carolina is not one of them.
ERIC is a good, exceptional program for identifying duplicate voters between states and for keeping voter registration rules clean. What people have taken exception to is one of the requirements of membership in ERIC is when you identify people in your state that are not registered but are eligible, the state is required to notify that person and give them an opportunity to register. And so that outreach component that was part of the membership contract to be in ERIC, some people took exception to. And that was one of the reasons I think that despite its track record of being a useful tool, that many states chose not to use it anymore.
We've kind of been talking about legal issues within elections pretty much the whole time, so, and we just have about 5 minutes left. I think, one of the biggest court cases and things that we watch here in North Carolina as far as things that go back and forth are redistricting lawsuits. Kelly, can you speak to kind of where we stand right now, and will those districts be updated before the next election?
I have to admit, Lily, once I got out of doing presentations on those and having it be my job to keep up with the redistricting cases, I cannot keep up anymore. And so there are people here who are much more up to date on that, and I'll let them answer that. I'm looking at you, Chris, but I'm sure there are people on the panel too.
Justice Orr may even
Yeah.
have some pending cases.
Yeah, I believe there's some things
Possibility,
pending. Mr. Leake.
I think it's safe to say that there's not going to be any changes in districts prior to this election. There will be cases still alive that will address whether there should be changes after the 2026 election. However, there is ongoing litigation in an area that I would call to your attention. And remember, I have openly said that I am an advocate, proponent of the North Carolina State Board of Elections, which occasionally uses the State Bureau of Investigation. And I would say to you, for one thing, we're not touching upon it here, is that the State Board of Elections has great responsibility in the financial end of election corruption, and has, over the last 2 decades, done a lot of stuff in that area that has hopefully protected the integrity of our election from that end. There's another issue out there, though, that deals with the composition of the State Board of Elections, which will certainly be impactful on its independence, in my view. That is that the General Assembly initially adopted legislation that we were going to have even number of board members at both the state and county levels. And you would say, or I think you would say, I say, that basic contract law told us that you never have a board of directors of even numbers. Because we would have a lot of ties. Isn't that what you learned, Judge?
That's correct.
And the initial concept proposed that if there was a tie at the county board of elections, the county commissioners would settle that. If there was a tie at the state board level, the North Carolina General Assembly would settle that. Well, that got reworked somewhat, particularly at the county level. But at the state level, the concept got changed that we would have 8 board members. 8 board members. 4 Democrats, 4 Republicans. And that the General Assembly would settle who the chairman would be if the board couldn't agree. And if there was some sort of deadlock, that the General Assembly, after 60 days, would have the ability to resolve that deadlock. That particular legislation was declared unconstitutional by the North Carolina Supreme Court. However, there's another attack underway, and Justice Orr could give a much better litany of this than have I just done, because I think I have erred on one timing issue about, there was an issue which our Supreme Court ruled on earlier that said, you're tampering with the State Board of Elections. You're trying to take away the authority of the government, and that's unconstitutional. This new attack, expansion of the board, is basically going to take the same issue ultimately to the Supreme Court again. There has been a special panel of judges appointed by the Chief Justice who have ruled unanimously that the existing proposed legislation, they believe, and I think, Justice, that they set forth one of the beliefs based upon, or a strong portion of the belief on stare decisis. A previous higher court had already moved on this basic issue. That issue is going before the North Carolina Supreme Court. They should overturn and change the method that the State Board of Elections has been operating with 5-member boards, independent of the legislature, independent of the governor, that could have an impact upon the quality of election administration and investigative authority of the state board. So when the Supreme Court takes that appeal up, it's been delayed, as I understand it, in part due to the death of one of the Republican attorneys actively involved. But that is the big case that might impact North Carolina elections prior to the 2026 elections.
Well, on that note, I think it's, very telling and also appropriate to end our panel about elections with an eye towards the courts and what's going to go on there before the general election. So thank you so much to all of our wonderful panelists. I think everyone did a great job. I'm going to turn it back over to our North Carolina Network for Fair and Safe and Secure Elections co-hosts and to close out the evening.
We don't know who breaks the tie.
Let's also give our moderator a big hand. Thank you, Lilly. It's great having a reporter ask questions. I loved hearing the individual reasons why everybody cares about our elections and doing democracy. And I guess I need to tell folks that on the way out, might be food out there, Chris?
Earmark's finest cookies.
Might be some cookies. We're gonna, I hope everybody signed in tonight because we're gonna send out a follow-up. We'd love to have you tell us if you thought this was a helpful panel, if we should do something better, or different next time. Please fill out that survey when you get that email. We really appreciate your time tonight. We know that there are folks here who are going to tell their friends and neighbors about what they learned. One of the things we found with our other tours that people do share the great anecdotes that they hear about ways that we are able to improve our system and make sure that everybody's vote counts and everybody has confidence in our elections. Because